The Cannonball Run made $72 million and became one of the biggest comedies of 1981. Audiences laughed at the drunk priests and the wild car chases, but something happened on that set that the studio buried for decades. A stunt went wrong. A woman was left paralyzed, and the crew kept filming that same day like nothing happened. There was also a Learjet that flew so low it triggered a federal investigation. The pilot almost went to prison. Nobody talked about it. The credits never mentioned it. This is what nobody noticed about the Cannonball Run. The Cannonball Run began in 1971 with a kind of restless fire that couldn't be contained. It grew from one man's frustration and turned into something wild, something that felt like a moving protest across the entire country. Brock Yates, who worked at Car and Driver, had written an article tearing into the auto industry for not fighting back against the new 55 mph limit. And after getting all that anger on paper, he decided to show the world that fast driving could still be real if people wanted it to be. So on May 3, 1971, he climbed into a customized Dodge van called Moon Trash Tuxedo and started a run from New York City to Redondo Beach, California. It was a 2,163-mile stretch of open road, long enough to test anyone. He wanted to beat the record set by Cannonball Baker in 1933, a record of 53.5 hours. When Yates and his team rolled into California in 40 hours and 51 minutes after burning through 315 gallons of gas, something changed. The run felt like freedom, it felt like rebellion, and it set the tone for everything that came after. Yates wasn't just leading a race, he was building a movement. After the first run, people started to see him differently, almost like a rebel leader behind the wheel. The idea had come to him after mocking the auto industry in his article, Grosse Point Myopians. He felt they were slow, overly safe, and scared of pushing limits. So instead of arguing, he created the Cannonball Run. He gathered friends, including his 14-year-old son Brock Jr., who worked as a police spotter in their Dodge van. They even used a fake satellite tracking story as a disguise, hoping the cops would think they were part of some official project. They left the Red Ball Garage in New York and aimed for the Portofino Inn in California. They knew the run was illegal, but the mix of danger, speed, and brotherhood made it unforgettable. They weren't just breaking rules. They were creating something people could talk about for decades. Then came a run that pushed things even further. Dan Gurney, who had won Formula One races and Le Mans titles, teamed up with Yates for the first true competitive cannonball in November 1971. They drove a Sunoco blue Ferrari 365 GTB Ford Daytona that looked ready to fly. When they left New York at midnight and headed west, it didn't take long for their path to become legend. They covered the same 2,263 miles in 35 hours and 54 minutes. They averaged over 80 Meilenstundensprünge, got only one speeding ticket, and fought through snow in the Rockies while keeping the car alive mile by mile. They knew the journey was bigger than the record. It was a way of proving that with the right car and the right people, the continent didn't feel so big anymore. That run earned a place in automotive history and set a bar many dreamers still chase. In 1979, the final official Cannonball Run took shape and carried the same wild spirit. This time, Yates partnered with Hal Needham, a stuntman turned filmmaker who had the same taste for chaos. They used a real Dodge ambulance fitted with a roaring 440 engine and fake Michigan plates. Their cover story was almost theatrical. They pretended to be rushing a sick senator's wife across the country. But the plan collapsed when the ambulance broke down in Palm Springs. They pushed on anyway, turning every mistake into a memory. The run felt like the end of an era, but also like a final spark. Even when the roads got rough and their cover story failed, the heart of the Cannonball stayed the same. It carried danger, humor, and the thrill of tipping the law without ever stopping the car. Needham wasn't done with the story, though. While his own Cannonball attempt was still fresh in his mind, he pitched it to Warner Brothers. The studio said yes. And in 1981, the movie Cannonball Run hit the world. Burt Reynolds and Roger Moore led the cast, surrounded by stunt-filled scenes and characters who felt larger than life. The movie wasn't a serious protest anymore. It was a comedy soaked in speed and mischief. It earned over $72 million and became big enough to earn a sequel. People loved the energy, the chaos, and the feeling that somewhere inside the jokes lived a real story born on American highways. And the cast they gathered for the film made it even bigger. The set felt like a melting pot of stars, athletes, and comedians, all thrown into one fast-moving project. There was Burt Reynolds, Roger Moore, Farrah Fawcett, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Jackie Chan, Terry Bradshaw, Mel Tillis, and even Brock Yates himself playing the race organizer. Production became confusing at times because actors showed up only when their scenes were scheduled, creating a patchwork of moments that somehow worked on screen. A tragic accident involving stuntman Bobby Bass left stuntwoman Heidi Von Beltz paralyzed, adding a dark shadow to the film's legacy. Still, the movie pulled in $72 million in the United States and $160 million worldwide. It was messy, chaotic, and unforgettable. For Burt Reynolds, the movie was more like a paid vacation. He made $5 million for the role, a huge amount then. He didn't bother reading much of the script. He mainly did it for Needham, who promised he would only work 14 days. Reynolds even joked that it felt almost immoral to take the money. The film made a fortune and became one of his biggest films of that year, even though he never considered it one of his best. Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. brought their own kind of storm. They played fake priests racing across the country, and the connection they shared in real life spilled over into their scenes. They often arrived on set already drunk, scribbling jokes on napkins and turning simple lines into wild moments. It became Martin's last major acting role before his retirement, and his scenes with Davis felt like small snapshots of their friendship. Farrah Fawcett entered the film expecting a dramatic adventure, and even chose thoughtful outfits for her character. She didn't realize she was in a comedy until people in the theater started laughing at her scenes. Her shock showed how unprepared she was for the tone. She was even nominated for a Golden Raspberry Award that year. Dom DeLuise, playing Victor Prinzum, who transformed into Captain Chaos, operated on pure improvisation. He made up half his lines on the spot and rarely rehearsed. Reynolds said he was like a storm that blew through scenes without warning. His unpredictable energy created some of the funniest moments, even while driving the crew crazy. Jackie Chan was introduced in the movie, but was miscredited as a Japanese driver even though he was Chinese. His scenes with Michael Hui in the high-tech Subaru mixed gadgets with martial arts. Roger Moore played a Bond parody using an Aston Martin with all sorts of playful gadgets, a nod to his real Bond fame. It brought an odd but entertaining contrast to the film. When the movie arrived in theaters on June 19, 1981, it exploded across 1,673 screens. It earned $11.7 million in its first weekend and held strong even though Superman II opened the same weekend with $14.1 million. It became a cultural wave. It stayed in theaters for weeks, earning $72.1 million in the United States and ranking 6th for the year. Adjusted for inflation, it stands at more than $233 million today. The budget had been only $7 million. It earned more than 10 times its cost. Around the world, the film kept climbing. France got it in July 1981. Sweden and South Korea got it that same month. It crossed $100 million globally. In Germany, 4.8 million people bought tickets. In Japan, it earned 2.1 billion yen and became the second highest-grossing foreign film of 1982. People bought T-shirts, toys, and board games. Its multilingual cast helped it move across borders without slowing down. The sequel was approved even before the first film finished production. That was how loud the buzz had become. Heidi von Beltz was only 24 when she showed up on the Nevada set of the Cannonball Run, ready to help with a stunt that seemed simple at first. Her fiancé, Bobby Bass, was the stunt coordinator, and he asked her to ride in an Aston Martin for a high-speed shot. Heidi trusted him. She trusted the crew. But the car had no seat belts, even though the stunt driver had already warned everyone that they needed to be installed. The rush to finish the scene pushed those warnings aside. So when they went in for the second take and the Aston Martin picked up speed and reached about 50 miles an hour, no one expected a van to appear in its path. The crash hit so hard that the sound silenced the whole road. Heidi's body was thrown forward, straight into the windshield. Her neck was crushed. When the crew reached her, she was unconscious with her head hanging to her chest. That moment changed everything. She survived but lost all movement from the neck down, living the rest of her life as a quadriplegic. She carried that weight for 35 years until she passed away at 59, remembered for her strength and the fight that followed. After the crash, Heidi filed a lawsuit against Stuntman Inc. and director Hal Needham. The case dug up things many people wished would stay buried. It showed that seat belts were right there on set and could have lowered her injuries to something far less severe. The jury saw the carelessness clearly. They awarded her $7 million, although contributory negligence reduced it to about $4.6 million. Even with that reduction, the verdict became a shockwave through Hollywood. It exposed how safety was often ignored to save time or money. The lawsuit pushed the industry into new rules. Seat belts became mandatory in all stunt vehicles. Directors lost the power to make last-minute stunt changes on location. And by 1981, the Directors Guild made sure those rules stayed in place. Stunt performers finally had something protecting them. The impact didn't stop there. The accident forced everyone in Hollywood to face how stunt performers were treated. Many were expected to risk their lives with no power to say no. Some feared being fired if they complained. Heidi's case made that impossible to hide anymore. It also crushed the people closest to her. Bobby Bass felt the weight of what happened. Hal Needham called it a wake-up call. Yet, the show went on. Filming continued that same day, even though one of their own had been critically injured. The coldness of that moment still shocks people who hear it. But Heidi's courage and the battle she fought after the accident saved more stunt performers than anyone could count. Her case reshaped the rules, and those rules became a shield for generations to come. Far from Heidi's tragedy, another stunt in the same movie brought its own danger. One of the wildest moments ever captured in an action comedy came from a real Learjet flying close to the ground. It wasn't a model. It wasn't an effect. It was a real jet swooping over a narrow road in a single take. The pilot flew it so low that some people swore the wingtips brushed the air inches above the pavement. There were no FAA permits, no safety buffers, no backup plan. If the pilot lost control by even a breath, the jet would have torn through the set. People reported feeling the wind from the wingtips and hearing the roar shaking through their bodies. It was as real as it gets, and far more dangerous than anyone watching the final film could imagine. Because the stunt had no permits, federal authorities reacted fast. They opened a full investigation, not a casual check, a criminal probe. Hal Needham found himself in the center of it. Charges hung over him, and if they stuck, he could have gone to prison. The investigation showed that the pilot flew hundreds of feet below legal limits. It wasn't a mistake. It was a clear violation. Needham had to negotiate with officials just to escape prosecution. The production hid the details and left the stunt out of the credits to avoid more trouble. People later said that if the same stunt happened today, the penalties would be severe. Back in 1981, Hollywood was still operating in a gray zone where movie magic often blurred into reckless law-breaking. The jet itself came from Needham, and producer Brock Yates's connections from the real 1979 Cannonball Run, an illegal cross-country race. They wanted authenticity, and they knew people with access to a jet that had already done risky low-altitude flights. They brought it into the film with the idea that it would look incredible. And it did. But the jet flew so low that even seasoned crew members froze as it passed overhead. Laws meant nothing in that moment, because the film chased spectacle over safety. This connection to the real Cannonball Run gave the movie flair, but multiplied the danger for everyone watching from the ground. Audio recordings from the scene caught the sound of wind cutting past the jet's wingtips. That sound alone tells the story. It was the sound of a disaster that almost happened. Even though the evidence was strong enough to be used in court, the production escaped prosecution through private negotiations. The incident was removed from the credits and buried under Hollywood secrecy. It showed how far people could go in the name of a movie when the right connections were involved. If someone attempted that same stunt today, it would be treated as a felony. Modern aviation laws would make the stunt impossible without permits. The punishment would include heavy fines and possible prison time. But in 1981, a looser system and the belief that movies lived in their own world let the production get away with it. The stunt remains a reminder of how wild, risky, and unregulated Hollywood once was. The danger didn't stop with stunts. Chaos followed the cast, too. The most notorious behind-the-scenes story came from Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr., who arrived on set dressed as priests and genuinely drunk. They weren't acting. They were enjoying themselves, carrying real drinks and turning each scene into unpredictable comedy. Their slurred lines and loud jokes forced entire scenes to be redone later in post-production because their delivery was completely unusable. Hal Needham didn't fight it. Instead, he let the chaos become part of the movie's charm. Crew laughter often guided what stayed in the film. If the crew laughed, Needham kept the take. The looseness didn't end there. The script barely existed. Some lines were written on napkins or scribbled in parking lots minutes before filming. Dom DeLuise improvised half of his lines. Burt Reynolds skipped rehearsals to keep a relaxed vibe. Scenes grew out of whatever energy the cast brought that day. Farrah Fawcett walked into this atmosphere expecting a dramatic road movie. She prepared her lines carefully and asked about character motivation. She walked onto the set and found Dean Martin stumbling around as a drunk priest, while Sammy joked loudly beside him. She never saw a full script. Her surprise became a story of its own, because the film was nothing like what she prepared for. Needham had a simple rule that shaped everything. If the crew laughed, the scene stayed. Actors leaned into that rule. Reynolds approached each moment like a vacation. Dom DeLuise kept throwing out food jokes. Martin Mull added his own lines. What emerged was raw and alive. The movie became a celebration of unfiltered comedy. And beneath all the chaos, the cast created something that carried the spirit of the Rat Pack, wild and loose and full of real laughter. Everything around the Cannonball Run seemed wild from the first day, and once you step into its story, it keeps pulling you forward. It starts with a shoot in Las Vegas, when the crew tried to stage a high-speed chase using real cars real sirens, and no permits at all. They thought they could get the shots quickly and move on, but the noise rolled through the streets and real police rushed in with lights flashing and weapons raised. For nearly 10 minutes, the actors stood frozen beside a Lamborghini while officers shouted commands, trying to figure out why a chase was happening in the middle of town. The moment only settled when the production manager ran forward with papers and explained that they were filming a movie. After that, Nevada tightened its rules, and the crew had to scramble for new props because officers seized their fake lights and sirens during the confusion. That whole scene turned into one of the most dangerous moments ever talked about in Hollywood stunt circles, especially because mixing real law enforcement with staged mayhem can turn in the wrong direction so quickly. Soon after, another chase scene pushed the crew into the same kind of trouble. They tried again to film burnouts and sirens around Vegas without permits, hoping they could grab footage before anyone noticed. But locals heard the noise and officers arrived fast, surrounding the actors with guns drawn because they thought an actual crime was unfolding. Burt Reynolds and Dom DeLuise had to freeze beside their cars while officers tried to make sense of what they were seeing. The standoff stretched for about 10 tense minutes before the crew proved it was part of the Cannonball Run. It delayed the shoot, cost the production fines, and became a famous reminder inside Hollywood that car chases need communication, or real chaos shows up. Even the props carried stories. The ambulance in the movie was not just a movie vehicle. It was the actual 1979 race van used by Moon Mullins during the real Cannonball Memorial Trophy Dash. Mullins disguised it as an ambulance with a fake patient and medical equipment so he could slip past police during the real race. At one point in Palm Springs, he even staged a fake emergency to move through traffic stops. The van was a 440 Dodge, and it survived breakdowns, high-speed runs, and mechanical failures during the actual race. When the movie was made, the team tracked it down because they wanted authenticity. Later, it was restored and celebrated as a real piece of Cannonball history. The director, Hal Needham, pushed the limits too. He used his own personal Ferrari 308 for some scenes. The car wasn't insured, and during a high-speed pass, it scraped its doors and came dangerously close to a guardrail. The hit was bad enough to cost Needham money straight out of his pocket, and he later handed the Ferrari to Dean Martin and Sammy Davis Jr. for promotional use. The story became a small legend among filmmakers because it showed how far people were willing to go for realism at a time when safety nets were thin. Casting changed just as fast. Don Rickles had been lined up to play the priest, but had to leave the project at the last moment because his schedule clashed. Sammy Davis Jr. stepped in and paired with Dean Martin, creating a duo no one expected, but everyone remembered. Their energy clicked, and audiences loved the chemistry. Hollywood circles later called it a stroke of luck because the switch made the film funnier and more unpredictable. Even Burt Reynolds got pulled into surprises. At one point, he appeared as a police officer named Roy Tatum. The producer didn't recognize him mid-take and thought he was another actor, so he asked for a retake. Reynolds shifted his delivery, giving the scene two versions. Both cuts survived in different prints of the movie, turning the moment into one of those odd bits of trivia that fans still talk about because it showed the loose, chaotic mood on set. Behind all of this, the movie carried the weight of the real races that inspired it. Those races began in the early 1970s as a protest against strict speed limits. Brock Yates and Dan Gurney won the 1971 race in 35 hours and 54 minutes. And by then, police across several states had already started watching the roads closely. After the movie came out in 1981, police departments everywhere grew even more alert, pulling over drivers they believed were trying to recreate the event. Participants in the real races faced real danger too. Some racers were arrested, and others hid in fields or took back roads to avoid capture. The races ended in the early 1980s because the pressure from law enforcement became too heavy. Jackie Chan's experience added another layer. His scenes were removed from the final cut because producers felt they were too intense and might upset Japanese audiences. That decision pushed Chan to rethink how he wanted to appear on screen. When he saw how Hal Needham included bloopers at the end of his movies, something clicked. Chan began adding his own blooper reels, starting with Dragon Lord in 1982. Those clips, showing stunt mistakes and behind-the-scenes mishaps, became his trademark and eventually changed how action films around the world treated end credits. Burt Reynolds, even though he was the face of the film, later said he regretted doing it. The movie earned $72 million worldwide and became one of the top films of 1981. Yet Reynolds felt it hurt his career. He believed the slapstick tone overshadowed his craft and boxed him into the same kind of comedic roles. He talked about those regrets for years, and even in 2018, he mentioned how he wished he had stepped away before it began. The real 1971 race almost collapsed before it started because Missouri State Police were tipped off by truckers who noticed something unusual. Officers pulled over several participants, questioned them, and even held the 1972 winner, Art Bear, for 6 hours before releasing him. It turned into a chase between law enforcement and racers across multiple states, and the event became known for these tense encounters that the movie only hinted at in a lighter way. The franchise tried to expand fast. The second movie was approved before the first one was fully edited. But the third film, Speed Zone from 1989, fell apart in every way. It had an $18 million budget and made only $3 million back. Most of the original cast refused to return. Critics tore it apart, and audiences ignored it. Soon the film was pushed out of the Cannonball legacy and almost forgotten. Even so, the movie influenced the world in surprising ways. The hit arcade game Outrun from 1986 was inspired by Cannonball Run's idea of long open roads and wild cross-country drives. The game introduced choice-driven paths, selectable music, and a sense of freedom that shaped future racing games like GTA and Need for Speed. Modern recreations like Cannonball bring back that original spirit with smoother performance and upgraded visuals. Safety rules changed over time too. The real races and the chaos around them added pressure for stronger road laws. Seat belts, once ignored, became mandatory after Congress passed the National Traffic and Motor Vehicle Safety Act in 1966. By 1983, most states required seatbelt use. Usage rose from 14% in 1983 to over 90% by 2025. Hollywood itself didn't change stunt safety immediately, but public awareness grew, and eventually the rules tightened. Even now, the Cannonball spirit hasn't fully vanished. Underground teams still attempt record-breaking runs. In May 2020, Arne Toman and Doug Tabbitt completed the drive in 25 hours and 39 minutes, averaging more than 112 miles per hour. Some secret attempts claim even faster times. These runs use advanced GPS, spotters, and modified cars to avoid detection. And every new attempt shows that the thrill of the Cannonball still stays alive far from the public eye.